just a bit about me, and it's a bit about me. I grew up in Newton, so I've been Boston area for the vast majority of my life. Did my undergraduate work down at Brown University in public policy and international relations with a focus on the environment in both, and worked at the EPA both in Washington and in Boston out of college, working on regulatory and non-regulatory issues in environmental programs. Did my graduate work at the University of Michigan and got an MBA and a Master of Science in Sustainable Enterprise, and used that time to, one, focus on climate action in the built environment, and two, really pivot to experience in the private sector to be able to understand within the built environment what were the opportunities to affect change in a positive way, and have that experience from the inside. So after my graduate work, returned to Boston, I worked for Boston Properties, which has now been rebranded as BXP, and was in their development shop, but had the privilege of sort of starting their climate reporting and then sustainability strategy work that has now become a full-time team at BXP. Most notable in terms of projects in Boston was Atlantic Wharf, which at the time was the first LEED Platinum high-rise anywhere in New England. Also, is a historic building and two facades that were preserved, and just an example of being able to develop and be green and climate sensitive while enhancing historic preservation along the waterfront all at the same time. And was at Boston Properties until 2012 when I joined the Menino administration as the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. And did that for the last term of the Menino administration, and then and for a year with Mayor Walsh as well. Some highlights from that first tour of duty. One was Birdo 1.0, and it's exciting to talk about Birdo 2.0, but folks may remember back in the day the building energy reporting and disclosure ordinance. And it's good when you can update an acronym and have it mean different words, but keep the acronym the same. Which is now obviously evolved into the building emissions reporting, buildings emissions reduction ordinance. That was, folks remember at the time, that was actually, we were one of the first cities in the country to pass a reporting and disclosure ordinance at that scale. And it was a relatively close vote. It was 9-4, simply to have buildings report and disclose their energy, water, and resource use on a regular basis. So we have come a phenomenally long way in Boston. The other seminal moment was in October of 2012 when we had the near miss with Sandy. And folks on the call may remember at the time, it was not commonplace to talk about decarbonization and climate resilience in the same sentence. Even amongst environmental advocates. There was a widespread perception that if we talked about climate resilience, it was in some way throwing up a white flag on decarbonization. And we know we absolutely need to do both. And we know from the near miss of Sandy, which was 5 hours off of our high tide rather than 300 miles away, we missed a 1% storm. And in my tenure, throughout, and as I see Leah on as well, she and I got good at voicing this. We missed 4 more storms by a sum total of 20 hours. But they were unnamed nor'easters, which is far more likely to impact Boston in the sense of the shape of our harbor and when we're most at risk. So we were able to leverage that near miss from Sandy to start the Climate Ready Boston program in 2013, 2014, which I'll talk a bit about further. But climate resilience became such a positive movement in Boston that sometimes we actually forget that before 2012, all of our policies we're looking at the storm of 78 for our direction of travel. And it was not the norm, and it was actually really hard to talk about projected future climate in state and federal and local policy and zoning. So Sandy and Climate Ready Boston, really proud of the progress that was started then, and made significant updates to Article 37 in terms of embedding sustainability performance standards and disclosure in all major developments, and began to really lead by example in Boston and show what is possible nationally and globally when we can bring the business community together, the environmental advocates together. We joined C40, at that time, which is a global leading group of cities from around the world sharing their climate action best practices. and then helped form the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which was really globally the top 20 cities around the world that had carbon neutrality targets or better. So greatly enjoyed my time the first time around. And then since then, most recently, I was with a global engineering and consulting firm called Arup. And we most recently was responsible for our offices in Boston, New York, New Jersey, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. And the firm was founded in 1946 and has been a leader in sustainable development and what they had described in the 70s as social usefulness from the get-go. Around 46,000 employees, around 20,000 employees around the world, including about 2,000 here in the US. So in terms of projects that I had the opportunity to lead of impact on this remit during my time at Arup, Carbon Free Boston, which was the predecessor analysis work to the most recent climate action plan that we're under right now in 2019, the Massachusetts Decarbonization Roadmap, which really helped set up the super stretch code and other policies at the state level, as well as most recently the Boston Housing Authority's fossil fuel free framework, to help meet Mayor Wu's audacious goal of getting all of Boston housing authorities, roughly 10,000 units of housing off of fossil fuels by 2030. Also in the private sector, I had an opportunity to work with many major developers, owners of property, medical and educational institutions in Boston on their both decarbonization and climate resilience policies, and understanding what is working and what leadership in Boston looks like, and was able to have Arup also join the Green Ribbon Commission as the only engineering firm to participate there. So in talking with the mayor when this opportunity came up, to craft the next generation of movement and evolution of the great progress in Boston, and create this chief climate officer role, I really feel like it's a legacy remit in my career, and just tremendously excited to work with this mayor on priorities going forward. I will organize them within the climate space, and then I can talk more broadly about some other environmental issues within the cabinet. But organize them within the climate spaces. First and foremost, the work that the city has been doing and will continue to do is embedded on rectifying climate injustice and environmental injustice, which in Boston was decades in the making, and both institutional and outcomes of planning. That needs to be first and foremost about us not only setting the table to make sure that all communities and stakeholders have a say in our direction of travel, but has to motivate us to taking action quickly to rectify injustice. It has to give us a sense of urgency, and climate action can help rectify many of the embedded injustices in Boston. Topically, the three issue areas of focus going forward will be one around decarbonization, and we have a great policymaking roadmap, certainly around 40% of our emissions that are covered by BERDO, and we have good programs for the remaining buildings that we need to emphasize and work with you all on implementation. And then obviously transportation is to a significant degree a shared responsibility between the city and the state to enable decarbonization of that remaining 30%. The second big topical area for us is grid modernization or energy transformation. We know that we need to be able to connect up the renewable energy supply that is on the books and will be entering the grid over the next couple of decades, to largely electrified buildings and transportation. And that grid modernization needs to happen deliberately and sensitively, and in a way that makes sense for our neighborhoods and our end users. And we need to be a part of the process in a really involved way. It also means we need to explore things like geothermal. We need to explore how do we decarbonize our existing district energy systems, how do we decarbonize thermal throughout the city, and make sure that we are prepared and resilient for a decarbonized networked future. And then the third large topic is around climate resilience. And in Boston, obviously, there's been a significant focus on coastal resilience because of the storms that we have had near misses with, as well as impacts from. But in Boston, it's not just coastal resilience. We want to focus on precip and the deluge events that happened in Leominster last summer, in Vermont, the last 2 years, and people saw the impacts in Brooklyn and a more urban scenario last summer as well. And then lastly, heat. We're already through our second major heat wave, and it's only the middle of July. And heat is, by far globally the largest human health impact from climate climate catastrophes today, but it gets a lot less press. And I am really excited, and Boston is getting a lot of attention this summer. In terms of some of the work, and I'll talk a little bit more about direction of travel in a second, but some of the exciting things that you all may be aware of and likely have helped support and working on. We have, with this last round of climate ready planning efforts underway or completed, we have all 47 miles of coastline having, again, underway or completed a climate resilience planning effort, understanding what success could look like. We are one of the only big cities around the country that has taken a look at all of our shorefront, in a process that has involved stakeholders and designers and mapped out a future. We've also, the mayor, in one of our most significant investments in the recent budget cycle, allocated $75 million in capital funds just to go after and leverage state and federal grants around climate resilience, so that we can take advantage of this moment of increased attention and resources around resilience, in particular to go after coastal solutions and support. Around heat, you've seen a very different and organized response and many different solutions based on the City of Boston's first Heat Resilience Solutions report that the mayor's really rolled out, an integrated response. And we want to be treating our extreme heat scenarios with the same level of detail and organizational preparedness that we do winter storm events. And it's been exciting to see that evolution. In particular, I'd highlight not only sort of the response in terms of the spray stations and mist stations and rollout, but from a planning perspective, the hiring of Adrian Jordan as our Office of Emergency Management Director now, and really focused on preparedness to climate change. And exciting to be working with him on rolling that out. In the decarbonization sphere, as you all know, as I mentioned, the Building Emissions Reduction Disclosure Ordinance, really puts in place, it's only 5% of the city's building stock, but it's 40% of our overall emissions, on a defined track to getting to zero by mid-century, and doing it in an equitable fashion, having payments for buildings that need more time, going into an equitable emissions investment fund, and we've already started to see several $1 million pre-invested in that to support decarbonization in EJ and low-income communities. Obviously, we adopted the specialized stretch code, ensuring that buildings in Boston are green and as energy efficient as absolutely possible, and the mayor's executive order on eliminating fossil fuels in new construction and major renovations in city buildings from here on out, making sure that the city is leading the way. The large building green energy retrofit program focused on affordable housing was launched in the last couple of years under Mayor Wu's leadership, and very excited to see the Franklin Fields Apartments complex join National Grid's network geothermal demonstration program. We have a lot of excitement to see those results and bring that out to bear in more district models, in particular in housing and school campuses. And then lastly, in this particular area, obviously net zero carbon zoning has gone through the planning department and is awaiting a final review by the zoning commission, which will have an expedited pathway for participating in decarbonized energy, as well as I think really importantly setting the stage for a better understanding of embodied carbon as we move forward in our building plannings going forward. And then in the energy transition and grid modernization space, Boston's Community Choice Electricity program continues to be nation leading. It has not only delivered increased beyond RPS standard electricity, very easy to apply for in Boston for residents and small businesses, but the 100% renewable portfolio is actually compared really well with just the base Eversource rate for the last several years. And it's exciting to be able to offer up 100% renewable power for the same rate as the base rate at Eversource. Obviously, this is every 6 months we go out to bid, or the Eversource rate changes, and we go out to bid every year or two. So we can't promise future performance, but really excited on past performance and what that is enabling the City of Boston to participate in. And then Renew Boston Trust continues to go strongly around decarbonizing our buildings in Boston and the 16 million square foot portfolio plus that the City of Boston controls. And then lastly, in the climate space, we know that there are tens of thousands of green jobs that we need to enable this work to happen. And it's exciting to see the Power Corps program launch. We're now in our third cohort and have graduated 80 students through that. and then a phenomenal grant from NOAA that we announced in June of over $10 million to start a climate resilience jobs program in collaboration with many of our partners. I want Boston to be a model for green and climate jobs in their creation, and having folks stay here in Boston to deliver on that excellent work, as well as us to be a model for green tech and clean tech from a jobs and incubation perspective, and science and technology. And obviously that's in alignment with the governor's wishes as well, and excited to see where that goes. So at a high level, before wrapping up, where my headspace is at, outside of climate justice and those three topical themes, one, I think, in looking back at where we were during my first tour of duty and where we are now, I think the 2020s really needs to be a decade of implementation. We know the targets that we need to hit. We have good policies in place, by and large, in the building sector. We have some work to do on embodied carbon. We have some work to do on transportation. But we also know that we're not currently on the trajectory to meet our audacious goals, and we really need to bend the curve by 2030 to get there. So we will be launching a climate action plan update, which will be Mayor Wu's first. We'll be launching that in early fall. We'll certainly be in touch with you all on the phone, and the broader community writ large. But it'll be focused on what do we need to do to implement and bring programs to scale to meet our targets by 2030, and be on a pathway to success. And I want to work with you all and look forward to working with you all on not only shaping the right policies and implementation programs, but then in having as many of you as possible become implementation partners. We know that we need to touch the hundreds of thousands of Boston residents, the tens of thousands of Boston's buildings over the next decade. How do we set up programs that can scale and that are meaningful? And we need to move beyond pilots into scalable programs. In that regard, and with the creation of my new role as Chief Climate Officer, one of my remits is to establish and co-chair with Oliver Sellers Garcia, our Green New Deal Director, a climate cabinet in Boston. And this will be the fellow chiefs in Boston that oversee significant policy formation and implementation portfolio related to climate change, both all three topics that I talked about. And really, this is about enabling an all of government approach. All of government and having a all of team approach is a great euphemism, but we need an org structure behind it to actually deliver not only the planning but the accountability for performance. And so we'll be launching that as well, likely in September. I've had great initial conversations with the group of climate cabinet chiefs that we anticipate initially being on this group. So, I'm coming here tremendously excited about the opportunity, thrilled by the challenge, very aware of the work that's in front of us. But in Boston, and I came out of the private sector for this mayor based on her administration and direction of travel and willingness to do the big things, and that combined with the support of those on the phone and the advocates in the community group sets Boston apart. And in this moment where we have a phenomenal state government to work with in terms of state resources and policy, and federal support in terms of the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it really is, in my mind, if not in Boston, then where else is this possible? We have to chart a path forward to a fully decarbonized, resilient, and just built environment for the enjoyment of all. And I want to make sure in Boston that we do this in a way that is replicable and followable for cities around the country and around the world. We, as folks know, we exist in a very strong mayor structure in Boston, but I want climate action in Boston to be done in a way that brings all stakeholders along in a supportive way, so that when other cities are looking for leadership, they say, yeah, we can follow that path that Boston has charted, and it is moving with the deliberate pace around decarbonization and resilience and justice that it should, but it's also supporting economic development and other societal aims at the same time. So with that, I will stop talking proactively and welcome questions, comments. I'll turn it over to Kawana to manage both the chat box and Q&A from the audience. We'll try to wrap by 7. I'm sure there are other things people want to do on a beautiful day like this. And this is an intro conversation. I look forward to getting out in the field and meeting you all in your neighborhoods going forward. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. As Brian mentioned, we will open the floor for comments and questions. So please use your virtual hand feature, and you will be allowed to unmute yourself. So first, it looks like we have Patricia, and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
I didn't hear anything about the critical need to protect the existing woodlands, all the existing woodlands, whether privately or publicly owned. I don't mean street trees, I mean woodlands. Climate scientists talk about how retaining large groups of trees that work together to sequester carbon and cool the air is equally critical to building energy efficient buildings and cars and electrifying the trains. And you haven't mentioned anything about protecting our tree canopy.
Yep, happy to talk about tree canopy, and we talked a lot about that in the session on parks. So tree canopy and shading, in my mind, is one of our critical climate adaptation approaches, as well as obviously providing for space for active and passive recreation. And it's not only our park system; it's our urban wilds, and making sure that we are protecting our open space. I would caution folks. The science that I have seen in terms of trees as a carbon sink in an urban context, it is not a wedge in our solution set. We certainly want to preserve the trees, and that's not to say that there aren't other uses for that. And we certainly want to grow trees for canopy coverage standpoint and wilds. But planting more trees in Boston from a carbon sequestration standpoint won't move our needle. It doesn't prevent the other big things that we need to do. But certainly a worthy goal, nonetheless, again, for all these other reasons.
All right, now we have Leah. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much, Brian. Great to hear the vision looking ahead, and also a nice little trip down memory lane too. My question, I have two questions, one on decarbonization and then one on waste, actually. And so on decarbonization, so my role at Northeastern now, we are leading a decarbonization study for our campus, really on board to be an implementation partner this next decade. And so we're looking closely at what it's going to take and what sort of investments we're going to need to make in our buildings and campus energy infrastructure. We expect, having looked at other campuses, other universities who have gone down this road, that it's going to cost us anywhere between $500 million and $1 billion to fully decarbonize our campus between now and mid-century. So that's a lot of capital. That's just for our little corner of the city. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we really get that work to scale. And then my second question, we're also looking to really, we've been sort of at this steady diversion rate of around 50%, and we're really trying to accelerate, in particular, food waste diversion and composting. So, there's lots of theories out there and different perspectives on hierarchies from composting to anaerobic digestion, and just would love to hear your thoughts. I know we have Deer Island is grind to energy type of systems still considered a good solution for food waste in Boston.
Excellent questions, Leah. Certainly on the cost of decarb, I mean, the numbers you're sharing are analogous to other major institutions as well. So we're talking, billions of dollars of investment in the built environment in Boston over the coming decades. I think it's a collective challenge to understand what are the right incentives and financing structures, and you're going to see, us in the city to try to use where we can, the full power of our financing authority and our tax appeal and bonding, and our ability to sort of be creative about us as a city, not only on decarbonization but on renewable energy procurement, if there are ways that we can help enable that market, as well as on climate resilience. I think initially, the path is, buildings need major overhauls over certain cadences anyways, in terms of replacing those major systems. We're now in that period where, we are within, 30 years of, 2050. So, that cycle of the major equipment, we can't miss any opportunity to electrify and decarbonize at the next major turnover. And I use 30 years as sort of a rule of thumb of, major equipment overhauls of most central plants. And we're going to have to get creative about how do we incentivize, those decisions, as quickly as possible. So there is no easy solution, but it is, it also does fit within sort of the major O&M upkeep. Within food waste, as you recall, that is near and dear to my heart. I do think that Deer Island should continue to be explored in terms of the anaerobic digestion capacity for food waste. But one of the things that has changed in the 10 years that I was out of office is just a much more significant composting program in Boston that is working. And people are composting their food, and it is being put to good use in terms of fertilizer and on people's shrubs and gardens. So I think getting food waste from aerobically digesting is the goal, and getting it out of sort of the traditional waste stream, whether or not it's incinerator programs to get to Deer Island or composting. You've seen the city's new push, which reminded me of our old push on rats. It's about getting food out of the public realm and out of our waste stream. So there are win-wins there. I'm excited to see digesters, at the campus scale. Can we talk about district energy and creating, capturing that methane at a campus scale when, at Northeastern, the volume of hungry students pretty consistently and the food waste going through your campus are the ways that we can incentivize and encourage that food not to leave campus and actually to be put to good energy use right on campus. So excited to partner there as well. We do have the recycling program in general and sort of waste, that is one of the changes that now it does fall within our cabinet firmly, which is great. So you'll see some movement on that shortly. I know folks on the call had worked with Susan Casino in the past. I was excited that role is now sitting in this cabinet. So it will get attention in terms of resource and reuse policy.
Great, thanks. Now we have Sarah Freeman. Should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, and welcome back. It's nice to see you, Chief. I have a question that I actually asked you in person in that time between when you were announced and began. And I'll follow up with an example of why I'm concerned. It relates to what Pat Alvarez said as well, which is the nature, the role of nature-based solutions. And over the years, parks and open space have become a smaller piece of the total pie, it feels like, when you add energy and climate and these other huge important issues, what's left for parks. And one example of why I'm concerned about that, many of you know, I've been working for years on the Shattuck Hospital project, and at a city council hearing back in April, so 3 months ago, the team was asked who they're talking to in the city. And the answer was someone from the mayor's office, housing and health. They didn't even mention environment or parks. And that just felt like a slap in the face in general, but for that location in particular. So this is an appeal to make sure everyone that's talking with the city thinks of environment and parks as an important part of the conversation.
Great. Thank you, sir. I mean, as I think and it's great to see you. I'm not shy about butting myself into conversations in the city or elsewhere. So if there are places where you're hearing that the EOS cabinet or myself is not represented, let me know, and I will butt myself into those conversations. I did not mean at all in my preamble to underemphasize the importance of open space or parks. It was just that we, in organizing the listening session for the remit of this role, we actually had a separate one on parks and open space. So again, as Kawana said, this is our third. We had one on historic preservation. We had a second on parks and open space. This was more formally on environment and climate change, understanding that Venn diagram is significant. That overlay between parks and open space and environment and climate is significant. It's certainly, I am heartened. A couple of things I'll react. One, we now formally have a director of green infrastructure. in the city. So it's not just parks and open space, you know, and it's not just investments like the Franklin Park Action Plan and having a parks administrator. We have somebody whose sole focus is to bring more green infrastructure to our streetscape, and think about green solutions rather than gray to urban heat island and stormwater sequestration. So I think there's been a lot of progress. We also now have a tree ordinance. You know, we have different policies in place. I will give folks on the call a preview. We are way ahead of schedule for our spring and summer planting, you know, for trees. So, you know, it definitely gets my attention, and I didn't mean to convey otherwise in how we had organized these topics. But again, do let me know if there are particular issues you feel like I should be present in that you're not seeing me.
Okay, Maria Lyons should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, I met you, Brian, at the meeting at the Harborfront Neighborhood Alliance. It's nice to see you again. And thank you for doing this, because it shows me and the rest of us that you know that it's important to speak to the community, especially on environmental issues, because there are things that we know and we see that people just coming to do studies might not.
Yep.
And the fact that you recognize that is very appreciated. So thank you. I'm just going to bring up the two things that I mentioned before to you, just because there's a big audience here, and I think that would be helpful. And one is a climate resiliency problem, and both of them have to do with Tinian Beach. And I know Tinian Beach is a DCR state park, but it's surrounded by the city, and these two issues do involve the city. The Climate Ready Boston made the plan for the climate resiliency of Tinian Beach, and it is beautiful, but the residents of the neighborhoods of Port Norfolk are very concerned that it's going to divert water into the streets of Port Norfolk. And if the Neponset Wharf project ever gets built, that's going to also divert water into the streets of Port Norfolk, and we're already being flooded. So if you could look into that, I would appreciate it. The other concern is the pollution at Tinian Beach, and this really does affect everyone, because this is a unique resource that is just being wasted. We have this beautiful beach there with new playgrounds and tennis courts and basketball courts right on the Neponset River Greenway Trail. And this could be used by people, families, kids biking down all the way, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, all the way to Reedville could come down and go to the beach here. But instead we have polluted waters. It's only the one of two in the entire state that's still polluted like this. And it is a city problem because it's a Boston water and sewer pipe that's causing it. And I believe they know what's going on. They keep saying they're looking at it, but this has been going on now for probably 15, 20 years, and it just needs to stop. So, you know, I would hope that it's not a combined sewer pipe. It's just a stormwater pipe, but it's acting like a combined sewer water pipe because there's pipes broken. They're saying possibly up as far as Fields Corner. So, I mean, this is a resource that should be used. It's a beautiful area. They're going to make it even more beautiful. It's just a shame to waste it. You know, my husband and I for years ran Tinian Beach Day with the Save the Harbor, Save the Bay. And we stopped doing it because I said, I can no longer tell little kids to get out of the water on Tinian Beach Day constantly. So we haven't run it for a few years now, but, and we'd like to have it again. So please, if you can light a fire in the Boston Water and Sewer, please do so and help us out with this, because I've been speaking to so many people about it and nothing ever happens. So thank you for your ear, and I won't waste any more time. So thank you, Brian.
No, thank you for raising that, Maria, and we will follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Martin.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm impressed with the tremendous amount of material you've thrown at us, Brian, and I also realize that simultaneous translation would be impossible given the speed with which you talk. I'd like to raise a question, because two of the major goals of the city and of this administration in particular are housing and then your goal, climate protection, the environment, and so forth. And of course, in many situations, the two have to work together. You've cited the example of Bordeaux, which is one. You've talked about embodied carbon. There's a lot of work actually I'm doing with some people at MIT about new materials for building, which will be much better in that respect, and even, in fact, be able to absorb carbon over their lifetime. And of course, there's the obvious point that the best way to deal with embodied carbon is to try and reuse existing structures. So rather than demolish them and then replace them. My concern is the following. There are projects of which I'm aware in which housing is being used as an excuse to harm the environment, and in particular parklands. I'll refer to the 2 Charlesgate West project as one example. So I'm wondering, is there a debate within the city as to how to reach decisions and compromises when there are conflicts between what developers would like to do and their projects? By the way, their timescales are much shorter than yours. They're perhaps not much shorter than mine, given my age, but certainly much shorter than my concerns for my grandchildren. Are there debates about this? Because, you know, the kind of thing that happens is that a project gets approved by the BRA, which quite frankly is not the most favorite organization in the city, either under its new name of the planning department. And they clearly are going to harm parks for periods of time and to an extent that is much greater than any shorter-lived community benefits that are proposed, supposedly as mitigation. So I think that, and well, my question then really is this a subject that comes up and you have to debate between yourself, for example, and the BRA and other interests in City Hall? What's the best way to handle situations where the two come into conflict? That the priority of housing may come up against the priority to protect the environment, including particularly parklands. Thank you very much, and I hope to have further conversations about this subject.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I mean, I think, I'll speak at sort of the process and policy level without specific projects, but I think you're raising that there are tensions between density and the development process and preservation that get resolved, and there are interests. I can tell you, one, it is certainly my intent to make sure that parks and open space and climate is a robust part of those processes as we work through what's best for the city overall. I am keenly looking at not only the preservation of our existing open space and parks, but expansion, right? And we're looking at that expansion not only through the acquisition of additional land and space through the CPA, which actually I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about as well. The Community Preservation Act is a phenomenal point of success that happened shortly after my departure at my first tour, that allows us to buy land and expand our parks in areas and environmental justice communities that don't have adequate access to open space. So my goal is not just the preservation of open space and an expansion of it. And making sure that our folks within the climate cabinet are leading that charge. There is an effort underway now to more concretely look at how do we green while growing, and making sure that we actually leverage development, for the purposes of also preserving open space at the same time, and make sure that we're deliberate about the needs of neighborhoods and communities, and not simply, going at what may be best for, a particular block or a particular constituent, but making sure that we're meeting open space needs writ large in neighborhoods that can be augmented and supported by appropriate development. And that's not to say there won't be tensions and disagreements, in particular parcels, but open space has to be viewed as a net opportunity as we think through neighborhood development, in concrete and specific ways. But I appreciate the question, Martin.
Okay, Chief, someone's asking a clarifying question in the chat. They said by open space, do we mean woodlands or parks? Parks are not woodlands.
Sorry, yeah, I'm using the term generally, so both. I think open space, parks and recs, and that's one of the things that we're moving towards in the city is I don't want the purview of of the EOS cabinet and of the climate cabinet to be simply the land that Parks and Recs owns. It is an open space plan that looks holistically, because honestly, the citizens of Boston and residents and visitors, when you're experiencing open space, you're not thinking, oh, this is a DCR park, or oh, I'm on the Greenway Conservancy Park, which is actually just a deck that the transportation department owns, or oh, I'm in Franklin Park. it is open space that needs to be organized and and appreciated by folks throughout, and we need a planning process that does that. I want that led out of this cabinet and with the phenomenal expertise out of Parks and Rec.
Thank you. Next, Julie, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Brian, welcome back, and congratulations.
Thank
I had two sort of broader questions. One was, if you were czar, what would you try to accomplish that you've seen? Like, I know we have a lot of governance issues and funding issues, but sort of writ large, if you had the funding and governance needed to do something really cool and transformative, what have you seen in other cities that you'd really like to see here in Boston? Is one question. The other question is, when we're doing climate resilience projects, we sort of only look out 50 years because projections get so uncertain at that point. So we're not looking 25 years out in the capital repair cycle. It's really sort of, where do projections get so wacky that we can't, that both they get too high, so we probably are going to flood widely, but also there's just too much uncertainty. So with the huge complex portfolio you have, it's really hard to sort of look above shoring up our current infrastructure to what happens next when we can no longer. And this is maybe a question, maybe just a thought, is we have done these really cool plans, but there is a point where it's too expensive to keep shoring up. And my hope is in your at the city, with all this experience that you've had, both with the city and away, to move the conversation towards how much is too expensive before you move uphill or inland, or get a lot denser, because shoring up we have now is just going to be too expensive.
All right. So one was a big idea that isn't currently in the pipeline. Is that right? That, and that I'm inspired by globally. And then the second one is on sort of that long-term, the long-term climate scenarios and how we're adapting. Is that about right? Okay.
Sorry, way too long. One is, what are some really cool ideas you'd like to see in Boston? Okay. If you were able to, not blocked by limitations. And the second is, maybe it's a request to see if you can peel off some brain space to think about under what parameters or costs do we actually have to shift to transformative change versus shoring up what we have right now.
Okay. So the first one is more fun. So I'll answer the first one and then go into more in depth on the second one. I mean, there are a ton of really excellent ideas. There are two that I'll mention just for time sensitivity. One is, we have some district systems in terms of steam and cogen that are really important to our baseload in Boston. I'm looking forward to the creative solutions to decarbonize those systems. Vicinity and Matt O'Malley, who was one of the Birdo authors, took a phenomenal group of public and private sector folks over to Europe this summer to see some pretty phenomenal state-of-the-art technology that can produce steam using electricity, and green power, and balance that. What do we do with offshore wind in the middle of the night challenge? So I think that's one thing that is on the agenda is, how do we decarbonize our district systems in a way that supports meds and eds and campuses, and we're not walking away from those billions of dollars in investments. We can have our cake and eat it too, right? In that regard. And then the big one, also energy related, is, I am not an engineer, even though I had the privilege of running an engineering firm. I still don't understand why we can't use the thermal energy of the ocean and Boston Harbor the same way that Toronto, it has a cooling loop serving 30 million square feet off of Lake Ontario. I want us to explore using thermal energy. If we can do a 9-mile pipe for effluent off of Deer Island, how do we appropriately, from a thermal perspective, while dealing with environmental concerns, think about our access to the ocean differently as part of our solution. To the climate resilience challenges in the out. I mean, I think one question is, one approach is philosophically, the work that we've been leading and that that Oliver and Chris Osgood have been leading, is embedded with the principle of evolving over time. So we are building coastal resilient solutions that can adapt and protect against ever greater storms over time without a wholesale reconstruction. So, protecting against the 2030 floodplain, also is putting in, the parts and pieces to be able to expand for the 2050 and the 2070 storm. Because I think that's the right sort of preparedness principle and cautionary principle approach. There may come a point in time where, the cost of retreat and rebuilding somewhere else, looks more attractive than the cost of construction on the shoreline. But the challenge for us in Boston is, as many on the call know, and I know Julie, is 1/6 of our city is built on filled tidelands. So it's not simply, in many cases, just walking back from a couple of blocks on the shoreline. It's giving up significant, built environment assets over time, all of that embodied carbon, all of that economic activity on a really significant portion of our landmass. Boston is the fourth most at risk from a just existing real estate development to sea level rise in the country, after New York, which is massively bigger, Miami, which is inundated today, and New Orleans, which is 10 feet below sea level. So that becomes the opportunity cost that, like, you're walking away from that if we contemplate managed retreat. And that's not at all to say we won't at some point in time get there. My priority is solutions that can evolve over time, and expanding and while being cognizant of change over time. But it's a great question.
Okay, Joy, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Brian, so much for your energy and for being direct and honest and sort of thorough and thoughtful in your presentation. And I guess kind of circling back to the point about 1/6 of our land base sort of being under being previous landfill, and thinking about climate resilience, given that there's an unpredictability of weather events and predictions around Boston's impending flooding. Is there an evacuation plan in place? Are we thinking about that? And if so, how does that plan consider the slowing of traffic that we're currently doing with the installation of the speed humps around the city?
I can speak more formally to the first part of the question, and then I'll look into the latter part. So it's a great question, and it was something that actually after Sandy, we paid a lot of attention to, because we had that near miss. But if we had to call for an evacuation of areas like Columbia Point, are we pointing folks to roads that are operable at that time, or are we pointing folks to roads that are actually being flooded by that storm event? So we do need to make sure we are wholesale updating our egress patterns and our evacuation routes, dependent on the type of event that we're experiencing. And Adrian Jordan, the new head of OEP, and I have already talked about that. There has been planning in place for years to look at those opportunities and solutions around new signage. You'll see this spring, and Oliver can correct me if I'm wrong, but was the first time we actually told people not to park on a certain street in East Boston during an expected high tide and flooding event, because we knew that if you parked there, your car was going to get flooded out. That was the first time we'd taken that approach, which everybody knows on snow days, what arterials not to park on. That's going to be the new norm, where for flood-based events, we're going to say these are the roads you can't park on right now, because we haven't protected the shoreline. And obviously to evacuate, many folks need access to their vehicles, right? So I think it is first and foremost, that is a priority area of what is our immediate response to climatic events, be it heat, be it precip, which is harder, but certainly heat and storm surge. Precip is harder because oftentimes we don't have nearly as much warning for those deluge events, and we need to act very quickly in terms of passive solutions that implement quickly. To your more specific question, I will have to get back to you in terms of circling back with Asha Franklin Hodge and Adrian on the impacts of speed humps. I know, part of the reason why we're using speed humps versus speed bumps is, they are, they communicate the same sort of necessity to slow down without necessarily being as disruptive to traffic, and far less impactful on, emergencies. And obviously that has also been the approach to bike lanes. By and large throughout the city is through things that can be run over by emergency vehicles. And actually our emergency response folks like bike lanes because it allows them to go around traffic, and they know that they can run over those, if they need to, right? And so that's also part of, emergency egress is knowing that the roads are available in the time that we need them. But great issues for raising. Thank you, Joy.
Great. Next we have Catherine. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kwana. Hi, Chief Swett. Welcome back. And thank you, like everyone said, for holding this listening session. Really appreciate that. I think I have a couple ideas to share with you, if you could consider them rather than questions. They're a little different than what we've been talking about so far. One would be if there's any way that you, and maybe it's even for the new cabinet, to focus on influencing the city budget so that city agencies and departments can do a better job leading by example. So we have a lot of unfunded goals and mandates, and we want to be part of achieving those goals and mandates, but we need the staff and resources to do that. The second idea is about starting at home. I think any great leader really has to invest in their own department and team. And I think as an observer and a partner of the environment department over the last 7 years, I've seen a lot of turnover in staff, and not in sort of a normal way you expect, but like in kind of a surprising way. And so I would encourage you and support you, whether it's you or your direct reports who are also leaders on your team, really take the time to invest in your own department and your staff so that they feel valued, respected, resourced, because we need them. We can't do this work without the actual people on the ground doing the work. So you'll be pulled in so many outward facing directions. I just wanted to raise that up.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. I mean, just two quick initial responses. One, you're spot on influencing the city budget. That is one of the intents of creating this climate cabinet, is so that we're able to hold ourselves accountable. And so, I know Sheila well, I know Arthur well, these are going to be big parts of the housing and planning budgets. I know Yasha well, but if we meet regularly and hold ourselves accountable to targets and plans, it means that things get done. To your second point, I've been amazed, first of all, I mean, the talent that is in this environment department, and there's some folks who were here the last time I was around, which is awesome, is pretty, it's amazing, right? I mean, the folks that we have who want to work for the city of Boston because of the ambition that we have on solving, these massive problems and challenges. We have been cherry picked a bit, which is a testament to the talent we have. I think Allison Brizis is doing phenomenal things at CZM and helping them shape climate resilience. Kat Eckel is at MBTA, doing phenomenal things. I think that will always be a thing, in terms of our talent. If we hire really great people, they may not actually stick around for 20 years. That doesn't mean we don't want them to, but if they fly elsewhere, can they be impactful? There's some folks on this call who used to work for me that are doing great things now elsewhere during my first time around. But I totally hear you with making people feel appreciated, and that there are career journeys within the environment department and certainly within the climate space across city government to be able to make change, throughout their careers here.
Great. Okay, so we are almost at time. I would like to respect everyone's time and move on if that's okay with you, Brian. I
see two last hands, so let's do those
Okay.
two questions and then we can wrap. And I'll take no offense if people have to drop to a higher and
Perfect.
better
Okay.
use of their Tuesday night.
I'll be quick, Kwana. I
Okay,
promise.
James.
Yeah, no, this is a wonderful conversation. Thank you to all my comrades and advocates, and I'm with you. This is the decade of implementation. I love that you've named it thus, and I pledge, and I'm sure others are excited to join you in that. And I like your prioritization. I'm going to invite you. I am currently part of the steering team for the Crane Ledge Woods Coalition, and I'd like you to come out and visit us. And just to brief you on that, because I think that's in some ways the quintessential example of some of the some of the tensions we've already talked about.
Sure.
Really complex but beautiful, and I think there's an incredible win-win solution that we've been pushing for. And if you can lean into that and help, maybe we'll get there. So how should I best follow up?
That'd be great. Kwana will include that in her wrap up in terms of her email and invitation, but I look forward to seeing you in the field. Meredith?
Hi, just echoing everybody's, thank you and appreciation. My question is around engagement of the residents most impacted. We've talked about sort of climate justice and we do community engagement, but understanding all the barriers that like the people most impacted are also the people who are probably least likely to be able to come to a public hearing or maybe need some need education because these are very technical things, and so curious sort of the strategy to make sure that the voices that we need are at the table. And then following that is green gentrification is a real thing, we've seen it in East Boston, and so including those voices can be one strategy to protect against that. But thoughts about engagement and green gentrification?
Let me start with the green gentrification, because I think the former question is a good segue back to Kalana, because I want her and my answer. There are a number of efforts underway at the city right now around development without displacement, around greening and investment without displacement. This is obviously not an issue that is limited to Boston, but it's an issue about policies of making sure that those who are in the neighborhoods can stay in neighborhoods as they evolve. I think the mayor has been a leader at putting some pretty proactive policies on the table for consideration in terms of rent stabilization, in terms of programs investing in low income decarbonization in very intentional ways, and making sure that landlords are being stand-up landlords. So this is part and parcel writ large to this administration's focus on avoiding displacement while addressing community concerns and needs, and having everybody find a home in Boston. So more to come on that, but thank you for raising it. On engagement in particular, one of the things I'm very excited about in coming back here that's different is not only is there a cabinet level director of public affairs, but Kawana Wise here is our director of engagement for the cabinet, and we have folks at the department level as well to make sure that we have the resources and the strategies to engage with all stakeholders and residents of Boston. So we are certainly open to suggestion of different approaches, but the state of the art of appropriate climate justice and environmental justice community engagement is far further along in terms of the state of the practice now than it was my first time around. And the city talks about best practices. We have a community engagement cabinet focus on making sure we're hearing from a breadth of stakeholders that hadn't always felt like they had access to or were invited to the table. I know we have more work to do. I do take to heart the comment on me speaking quickly and continuous translation. We need to make sure that we're translating in languages that folks can understand, and that we're speaking to constituents, beginning from where they're starting from, so that they can actively participate in conversations. I don't know, Kawana, I'll turn it over to you to maybe round out that answer and then round out the listening session, but I appreciate the question, Meredith.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'm just happy to be with the cabinet. I've been on staff for about 8 months now. And so we're just going to continue working together to reach stakeholders and community partners, and we'll start up some neighborhood sessions really soon. So I did drop my information in the chat, and I will also be sending out a survey, just giving folks more of an opportunity to expand upon questions or comments that may not have been captured in this meeting. But if you would like to organize a meeting, please contact me and let me know. And also, please don't forget to complete the survey, because that will be super helpful for us as we continue our engagement efforts. So I just want to kind of thank you all for your time tonight. And I know we went a little over, but definitely appreciate you spending this time having this amazing conversation. And so you'll be hearing from me. I can drop my information in the chat again if you need it. But thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone.